One unexpected night, while I was sleeping, my husband's nephew Lucas entered my room, deeply shaking my sense of security and privacy. Perhaps you, too, have faced a situation that tested your limits and left you feeling vulnerable. In this account, I share how I overcame the pain and confusion resulting from this episode, turning a disturbing experience into an opportunity to strengthen my marriage and grow personally. Here, you will discover ways to find resilience and renewal in challenging times. The story begins on a quiet spring afternoon when Lucas, my husband's nephew, arrived at our house. He had recently graduated and got a job in the city, which was why he needed a place to stay temporarily. I remember him arriving with a rolling suitcase and a shy smile on his lips, an image of youthfulness and hope. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with slightly messy brown hair that gave him an uncomplicated, approachable air. Upon meeting him, it was impossible not to notice his natural charm. Lucas had a calm and polite way of speaking, always very attentive to the needs of others. This, of course, made a great first impression on both me and my husband, who was excited to help his nephew take his first steps in his career. During the first few days, Lucas was extremely grateful and respectful. He made a point of helping with the housework, from setting the table to offering to cook sometimes, bringing some of the cooking he had learned during college. His presence brought a new energy to the house, which seemed more alive with his stories about the university and his future plans. However, what caught my attention most was his genuine interest in people. He asked about our day with an attention rarely seen, and his conversations, full of enthusiasm and curiosity, made anyone feel special. That, I confess, awakened in me an affection that I hadn't expected, an affection that began to color differently the long conversations we had at night, after dinner, when my husband was still in the office, sorting out the latest emails from the office day. This was Lucas, my husband's nephew, who arrived in our life with a suitcase and a smile, and without knowing it, he changed the atmosphere of our home, bringing new aromas and colors to our routine. He wasn't just looking for an apartment. Without meaning to, he began to find a special space in my heart, complicating feelings that I thought were well resolved. As the days unfolded, Lucas became an increasingly prominent and beloved presence in our home. Not only was he helpful, he also had a way of making everything seem lighter and happier. With my husband often involved in late-night meetings, Lucas's company became an unexpected comfort. Our nights began to be filled with laughter and sharing stories as we prepared dinner together. Lucas had a special talent in the kitchen, bringing with him recipes that he had learned during a stay in Italy. He taught me how to make homemade pasta and fragrant sauces, and I shared with him the secrets of traditional Brazilian cuisine that my grandmother had passed down to me. These moments, washed down with red wine and soft music in the background, allowed us to talk openly about our lives, dreams, and even insecurities. Lucas spoke with a burning passion about his desires to make a difference in the world through his work. He wanted to innovate, bring new ideas to his technology area, and really impact people. The sparkle in his eyes as he talked about his aspirations was infectious, and I found myself increasingly drawn into his conversations. He was also curious about my own journey, encouraging me to talk about my unfulfilled dreams and aspirations that had been pushed aside over the years. Each night, while my husband still didn't arrive, Lucas and I shared these pieces of ourselves, discovering affinities and comforting each other's frustrations. The empathy that developed between us grew subtly, involving us in a delicate web of complicity and affection that went beyond mere coexistence between distant relatives. These late-night conversations became the highlight of my day, something I began to look forward to with an anticipation that alarmed me a little. The kitchen, with its mixed aromas of herbs and spices, became our little refuge, a place where we could just be ourselves, away from the expectations and obligations of the outside world. It was there, between laughter and confessions under the soft light of the lamp, that I felt an emotional connection deepening, a dangerous flirtation with the fine line between friendship and something more intense and forbidden. As the days turned into weeks, the friendship between Lucas and I grew, becoming one of the pillars of our days. Our conversations evolved into in-depth sessions where we shared not only everyday trivialities, but also secrets and dreams that we rarely revealed to others. Lucas had this rare ability to listen, really listen, in a way that made you feel completely seen and understood. He gave me space to express thoughts and emotions without judgment, something I valued immensely. He spoke about his family with a fondness and reverence that was touching. He would tell me about his mother, who had bravely fought a serious illness while he was still a teenager, and how that had made him cherish every moment with his loved ones. Lucas did not hide his vulnerability when remembering the difficulties he faced, and this only made my respect for him grow. He confided in me how these experiences had shaped him, making him aspire to be a person who could make a difference in the lives of others. In return, I felt safe to open my heart about the difficulties in my marriage, which, although full of love, was sometimes marked by my husband's absence and emotional distance due to his constant work obligations. Lucas listened to me with an empathy that I rarely found in other people. He offered thoughtful advice, always emphasizing the importance of communication and mutual understanding in a relationship. These exchanges created a bond that seemed to transcend ordinary friendship. There was a silent harmony between us, an unspoken understanding that we shared something special, a refuge in each other that allowed us to be who we truly were, without masks or pretensions. It was an intense emotional connection, which began to color our encounters with a different, deeper, and in some ways, more complicated color. Lucas had become more than just my husband's nephew. He was now a close friend, someone whose presence I began to crave more often and more intensely. The way he valued family made me see him in an even more positive light, intensifying the feelings that, although I tried to deny, bloomed in the secret garden of my soul. It was a mix of admiration, affection, and a budding attraction that I knew I needed to handle carefully, given the complexity of our situation. On a rainy Friday night, we were curled up on the couch, watching one of the classic noir films that Lucas loved so much. He always had a refined taste in films and art, something we shared and which often served as the backdrop to our long conversations. The sound of the rain gently tapping against the windows created an intimate atmosphere, almost as if the world outside didn't exist. It was during one of these moments that Lucas, with a somewhat hesitant gleam in his eyes, turned to me and suggested that we go see a contemporary art exhibition that had come to the city. The exhibition was getting a lot of buzz and featured works by emerging artists, something I knew we would both deeply appreciate. I hesitated for a moment. On the one hand, the idea of spending more time with him in a cultural and inspiring environment was immensely appealing. On the other, I was aware of the fine line we were walking between deep friendship and something else that might be considered inappropriate. However, I eventually went along with it. Convincing myself that it was just an innocent outing between friends, a chance to explore our shared passion for art. We decided to go on Saturday afternoon. The day was bright and cool, a marked contrast to the rainy night before. Lucas came to pick me up, and together we drove to the city center, where the exhibition was being held at a renowned gallery. Along the way, we talked excitedly about our expectations and the artists we hoped to see. When we arrived, the gallery was vibrant with the energy of other art admirers. We walked side by side, commenting on the works that caught our attention. Lucas had a keen eye for details that often escaped me, and his ability to interpret the emotions and stories behind the paintings enchanted me more and more. Each painting, each sculpture seemed to bring a new topic to our dialogue, enriching our connection even more. It was clear that what started as an innocent outing was turning into a significant moment in our relationship. The way he would occasionally touch my arm when pointing to a work, or the way our eyes would meet and linger a little longer than usual, all contributed to a growing emotional tension. We were sharing something more than just an appreciation for art. We were sharing deeper and deeper parts of our beings. At the end of the exhibition, as we left the gallery, the afternoon was already giving way to twilight, and the city turned on its lights, bathing the streets in a golden glow. It was a beautiful and unforgettable trip, but it also left me with a feeling of internal alarm about the path we were taking. Still, in that moment, I chose to put these worries aside, enveloped by the beauty of the art and Lucas's engaging company. On that golden afternoon, as we walked slowly back to the car after the exhibition, I noticed a palpable change in the atmosphere between Lucas and me. The conversation flowed even more freely and intimately, and Lucas shared with me not only his impressions of art, but also his most personal and vulnerable feelings. He spoke with a sincerity that is rarely seen, about his doubts and hopes for the future. Watching him speak, there was an expression of genuineness and depth that only intensified the bond between us. As he opened up, I could see an even more sensitive side of Lucas, one he normally kept to himself. His words, loaded with emotion, resonated with me in a way I didn't expect. The way he looked at me as he spoke, with a calm, inviting intensity, began to stir my feelings in a way I struggled to understand. The soft evening light cast delicate shadows on his face, accentuating his features and making the moment even more intimate. I, in turn, found myself increasingly drawn to this vulnerability and openness. It was as if a new door between us had opened, and as much as I knew I should close it, something inside me hesitated. This unexpected attraction, which began as a whisper in my heart, soon turned into a cry I could no longer ignore. I felt confused and guilty, aware that my husband, who trusted Lucas and me so much, didn't deserve this kind of betrayal, even if only emotional. As we walked, the physical closeness between us felt natural, but filled with a tension that hadn't existed before. With each laugh shared, with each look that lingered a little longer than usual, I felt my heart heavy with a mixture of emotions. The excitement of the new and unknown, intertwined with guilt and fear of consequences, created a whirlwind of feelings that I struggled to understand and control. When we finally reached the car, the silence that enveloped us was not uncomfortable, but reflective. We both knew that something significant had changed in our relationship. The trip back was peaceful, with everyone lost in their own thoughts. I knew that from that moment on, our relationship would never be the same, and the weight of that realization accompanied me, as present as the night that slowly closed around us. As we drove home, the soft light from the streetlights illuminated the way, creating an almost surreal scene. The silence between us had become charged, a stillness that spoke more than words. I felt my heart racing, sensing that something was about to be said, something that could change everything. It was then that Lucas broke the silence. His voice was low, almost hesitant, but there was an underlying firmness to his words. He confessed that, over the past few weeks, his feelings for me had evolved beyond friendship. He spoke with raw honesty, not expecting anything in return, just feeling the need to be transparent about his feelings. I was shocked. His words echoed in the car like a sweet but forbidden melody. My mind was spinning, trying to process what I had just heard. Conflicting feelings flooded me. Surprise and confusion dominated, but I couldn't ignore the small thrill of emotion that his words provoked in me. I was deeply torn. On the one hand, there was loyalty to my husband, the man I shared my life with, who trusted us while working late to support us. On the other, there was the raw emotion of the moment, the feeling of being wanted in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Lucas's honesty touched me in an unexpected way, revealing a vulnerability we rarely saw in adult relationships. Well, I knew I needed to respond, but the words seemed to escape me. There was a weight on my chest, a responsibility to my husband, but also an undeniable curiosity about what could be with Lucas. I turned to him, watching his profile illuminated by the dashboard light, seeing the anxiety mixed with hope in his expression. In a shaky voice, I said that we needed to think hard about what this meant, that we couldn't act impulsively without considering the consequences. Lucas agreed, clearly relieved to have shared his feelings, but also aware of the complexity of the situation. He promised that, above all, he valued our friendship and the respect he had for my husband, and that, no matter what happened, he wanted to do what was right. The rest of the trip was spent in thoughtful silence, everyone lost in their own thoughts. When we arrived home, there was a sense that a threshold had been crossed, although none of us yet knew where that path would lead. Night had completely fallen by the time we entered, and the world outside looked very different than it had just a few hours before. After Lucas's revelation and the emotional turmoil that followed, we had some tense conversations in the subsequent days. It was clear that the situation required a resolution, and neither of us wanted this to further damage the relationship or marriage that I valued. Lucas, with a maturity that surprised me every day, recognized the complexity of the situation and made a painful but necessary decision. He came to me on a gray afternoon, the soft light barely able to illuminate the room where we used to talk and share laughter. His face was grim, reflecting the gravity of his decision. In a firm but clearly emotional voice, Lucas explained that he had started looking for another place to live. He wanted to preserve what was left of our friendship and respect my marriage. He didn't want to be the reason for possible friction between my husband and me. I agreed with him, feeling a mixture of relief and desolation. I knew it was the best thing to do, but the idea of seeing Lucas leave left me with a strange emptiness. I recognized that closeness had brought to the surface feelings that should have remained hidden, and now we faced the consequences of our interactions, no matter how innocent they initially seemed. In the days that followed, as Lucas looked for a new place to live, the atmosphere at home became noticeably heavier. We tried hard to maintain normality, but conversations no longer flowed as easily. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a reality we both preferred not to face. When Lucas finally found an apartment and began packing his things, The reality of his departure began to sink in. Helping him pack his bags was a quiet, introspective process. We both knew that those were possibly the last hours we would spend together like that, sharing the same space, breathing the same air, filled with unspoken memories and unspoken words. On the day of his move, the goodbye was brief. Lucas thanked me for everything, and with one last look full of meaning, he left. I closed the door behind him, feeling like a part of me was gone too. I knew that, from that moment on, things would never be the same as before, but I also recognized the need to preserve what was left of my marriage and my dignity. Lucas's decision to move had been a gesture of respect and care, not only for me, but also for my husband. As much as it hurt, it was the necessary closure to a chapter that, although brief, had been intensely lived. I now had to face the void left by his departure and rebuild normality in my life with the hope that time would heal the marks left by this experience. On the day of Lucas's farewell, the air was permeated with a mix of nostalgia and sadness. He had packed his things in the last few hours, and each object he packed seemed to seal another chapter of our brief but intense connection. I helped him with the last details, a comfortable but heavy silence hanging between us. The apartment he had chosen wasn't very far away, but the simple idea of not being able to see it as often brought an emptiness that was difficult to explain. As we carried her last suitcase to the car, our eyes met, and, for a moment, we seemed to want to memorize everything about each other, knowing that those details would soon become mere memories. Lucas stopped before getting into the car and turned to me. "You will always have a special place in my life. Never forget that," he said with a sincerity that made my heart clench. I just nodded, unable to find the right words. My emotions were in turmoil, a battle between gratitude for having met him and the pain of seeing him go. The goodbye hug was long and full of meaning, a goodbye not just to him, but to the intimacy we shared. It was a moment of mutual recognition of the depth of what we had experienced together, something that words could fail to fully describe. His presence, once so full of life in my routine, would leave a deafening silence. As he drove away, I stood in the doorway watching the car disappear down the street. The feeling of loss was palpable, as if, along with Lucas, a part of me was also leaving. We knew it was necessary to go our separate ways to protect what was precious in our lives, but the connection we had was so deep that it seemed to take root in my being, difficult to uproot or ignore. That day, and those that followed, I reflected a lot on the nature of our feelings and the choices we made. The house seemed strangely quiet, each room echoing Lucas's absence. I knew that over time, the void would begin to fill again with the daily grind, but the memory of that chapter would remain with me, a sweet reminder that life is made of encounters, some brief, some lasting, but all leaving marks, indelible. After Lucas left, the silence of his absence was replaced by palpable tension between my husband and me. It was as if, without Lucas's presence, all distractions had melted away, leaving us with the raw reality of our relationship, which, I realized, had become more strained than I cared to admit. For the first few days, I tried to act as if nothing had happened, but the memory of the emotions I had experienced with Lucas weighed on me. Every conversation with my husband felt superficial, and I internally struggled with my guilt and confusion. It was clear that I could not simply ignore or hide what I had felt, nor the changes it had caused in me. After many sleepless nights, Reflecting on the value of my marriage and the love I still felt for my husband, I decided that honesty was the only possible path if we wanted to rebuild our relationship. It was a cold autumn night when I finally gathered all the courage to tell him about the feelings that had arisen between Lucas and me. We sat in our living room, the place where we had shared our best and worst moments so many times, and there I opened my heart. I explained how things had evolved with Lucas, trying to be as delicate and clear as possible. I talked about the emotional connection, the conversations, and how it had all affected me. I assured him that nothing physical had occurred, but that I felt he deserved to know about the feelings that had developed. My husband listened silently, his face a mask of calm that did little to reveal the turmoil I knew was brewing inside. When I finished, there was a long silence, the kind that speaks more than words. Finally, he spoke, expressing his pain and disappointment, but also his understanding of how distance and his own involvement in the work had created a void between us that Lucas had inadvertently begun to fill. It was one of the most difficult conversations of our lives. We cried, we argued, and most importantly, we listened to each other in a way we hadn't in a long time. We decided that despite the pain and confusion, we wanted to try to save our marriage. We commit to being more present to each other, communicating our needs and feelings more openly, and seeking professional help to guide us through this process. Honesty was not an easy path, but it was what allowed us to begin to heal the open wounds and to reevaluate and strengthen our relationship. We knew the road ahead would be challenging, but we also understood that, together and with commitment, we could rebuild the trust and love we had promised each other. The weeks following my confession were a time of intense and sometimes painful reflection for my husband and me. Each conversation seemed to lead us into a maze of emotions and resentments that we needed to unravel together. It was as if we were learning to get to know each other again, to discover what we truly valued in each other and what we needed to change for our relationship to not only survive but thrive. We both agreed to attend couples therapy sessions, a space where we could express our feelings and concerns with the help of a professional. These sessions were challenging. We often emerged from them emotionally exhausted, confronted with uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our marriage. However, each session also brought us a deeper understanding, a rapprochement that began to heal the open wounds. We learned to talk about our fears and desires without the fear of judgment. My husband expressed how he felt neglected by my long hours spent with Lucas, while I shared my need to feel seen and valued. Together, we began to draw a new map for our relationship, marking the places where we needed to be more present, more attentive, more loving. Gradually, moments of tension gave way to moments of rediscovery. We started planning date nights again, like in the early days of our dating. One night, he surprised me by taking me to the same restaurant where we had our first date years ago. Sitting there, remembering our early days of passion and hope, I felt like we were rebuilding something beautiful on the ashes of our past. The importance of dialogue and trust has become the center of our lives. We learned that none of us were perfect and that our marriage would not only be strong because of love, but also because of our constant commitment to working for it, to talking openly about our failures and triumphs. Over time, our relationship began to blossom again. The little things that previously went unnoticed now became moments of shared joy. A sweet message in the middle of the day, a dinner prepared together, a walk hand in hand under the starry sky. Each of these small gestures wove the web of our renewed connection. stronger. This process has shown us that even in the darkest moments, there is always a chance for transformation and growth. Honesty and vulnerability, although scary, were the keys that allowed us to access a more mature and deeper love. Our path was not easy, but each challenging step was worth it for the life we were determined to rebuild together.